In this session, we will be going over data approval. We will start by going over the Data Approval app interface, reviewing data within the Data Approval app, how to submit data from partner to agency, how that affects data entry and when data sets are locked for data entry, accepting data as the agency, and subsequently submitting the data from agency to interagency. In this demonstration, we're going to go over the data approval process within Datum. We're going to submit from an implementing partner to an agency, submitting from the agency to an interagency, and further up through the approval chain follows a very similar process. Before I get started, I'm going to go to the data entry application and make sure that I have some data present for me to submit. If I've already done the data entry exercise, I should have some data available to me already. We can see that there's some data already available. So I'm going to get into the data approval application, and we're going to go over how we submit this data from the partner level to the agency level. So to go to the approval app, we go to Apps, and then find the data approval application. Before we proceed, allow the application to load in its entirety. When the application is loaded, we see that we have a couple different options. In the production environment, if you have access to multiple operating units, you will have to select the operating unit before you can proceed. But in the training environment, everyone is assigned to the Demoland operating unit, and it is therefore selected by default. To continue with this process, we first select the dataset group, and then the period. Here we have two tabs, Submit and View. Anytime that we want to submit data, we want to make sure that we're in the Submit tab. If we click on the View tab, it will show us all of the mechanisms that are available to us, regardless of their submission status. The Submit tab will only have mechanisms that have not yet been submitted upwards. To continue, I would select the mechanism or mechanisms of interest. If I want to select multiple mechanisms, then I would use the appropriate checkbox. In the training environment, we only have access to one mechanism, but in production, you might have multiple mechanisms that you would be submitting. After I've selected the mechanism or mechanisms, I would then click on Proceed. It will load the form, and we can then choose the data set. After choosing the data set, I can review the data that I've entered in the approval application. If I'm happy with the data that I see, I can then submit this to the agency level. I would do this by submitting the mechanism. So I click on this blue Submit button, and we'll see here when it's submitted successfully, we get a prompt in green. The options have now changed. Rather than Submit, I see Recall Submission as a tab, and I see View as well. You will see the status has also been updated to Submitted by Implementing Partner. I can recall the submission up until the point that the agency accepts the data. At that point, I have to have the agency send it back to me. Because I've now submitted the data, I can no longer make any further changes in data entry. I can of course recall the submission myself and then make edits, but if I go back to the data entry app as is, I then find the mechanism and dataset within that same site. It will give me a prompt that the dataset is locked. This is because I've submitted the dataset for approval at the agency level. So now let's see what it looks like at the agency level and how they accept the data and submit it forward. So now that we've logged in as an agency user, we're going to continue with this demonstration. Let's load up the data approval application. And once again, before you continue, just allow the application to load completely. After it's loaded, I'm going to select the dataset group as well as the period, and it will load available mechanisms for me to review. Now we can see that the mechanism I submitted as a partner user is available for me to review. I have some new tabs now, Accept and View. If I want to accept this data, I can select the mechanism or mechanisms of interest, then click on Proceed. It will then load the datasets. I can select my dataset, and I can review the data. If I'm happy with how that looks, I can accept the mechanism. We will get a prompt in green saying that it's been accepted successfully. Now we can see that the tabs have changed a little bit. We see Submit or Return Submission, and then View. In the Submit or Return Submission tab, we can either submit the data to the interagency level, or we can return the submission to the partner level. We can see the status has changed to Accepted by Funding Agency. This mechanism is now locked from the partner. They can no longer recall their submission. The only way for them to edit the data is for the agency to send the data back down or return the submission back to that partner. If I'm ready to now submit this data to the interagency level, I can select the mechanism, click on Proceed. If I select the dataset, we'll see the data, and then I can submit the mechanism. Here I can also return the submission if I want to return it back down to the partner level. When I click on Submit, it will also give us a prompt notifying us that this has been done successfully. Now we can see here I have two tabs, Recall Submission and View. I currently have no other mechanisms to accept, as nothing has been sent from the partner to the agency level. If I had more mechanisms to accept, an additional tab for Accept would be available. I can recall the submission up until the point where the interagency user accepts the data. At that point, I can no longer recall the submission. Very similar to how when the agency accepts the data, the partner can no longer recall the submission at the partner level. Now that data has been submitted, and the interagency user would go through the similar process in order to accept and subsequently submit their data. We can see that the status has changed to Submitted by Funding Agency, which means now the submission process has been completed at this particular level. So just to highlight what we went over in this particular demonstration, we first submitted data from the partner to the agency by going to the Data Approval application, making sure that we selected our appropriate dataset group, period, and then we were on the Submit tab. We selected our mechanism, clicked on Proceed, selected our data set, reviewed the data, and then submitted the data from partner to agency. As an agency, we logged in and we checked the approval application. We had to select our dataset group and our period first, and then we were able to review the submissions. We could accept the data at the agency level, and then we could submit it further up to the interagency level. This process is very similar for the other levels, upwards through the approval chain. This is how the data approval process works within Datum. And if there are any questions, please feel free to contact the Datum deployment team.